I declare the motion passed. Proposed resolution moved under the Public Finance Ordinance. Members who wish to speak, please press the Request to Speak button. I now call upon the Secretary to speak and move the motion. Secretary, please. Madam Deputy, I move that the motion as printed on the agenda be passed. The purpose of this motion is to seek funds on account to enable the government to carry on its services between the start of the financial year on the 1st of April 2023 and the time when the Appropriation Ordinance 2023 comes into operation. This is an essential procedure. The specific arrangements are those that were followed in recent years. According to the budget timetable this year, the LegCo will resume the second reading debate and conduct the third budget meeting of the Appropriation Bill 2023 at its meeting on the 26th of April 2023 and the 3rd of May 2023. As such, the Appropriation Ordinance 2023 would not come into operation before the 3rd of May. To ensure that the government will not need to halt public services, including services closely related to people's livelihood, such as education, social welfare, healthcare, and security, due to the lack of funds when the new financial year starts on the 1st of April, we need to propose this motion. The funds on account sought under each subhead in accordance with the fourth paragraph of the resolution have been determined with reference to the relevant provisions in the 2023-24 estimate of expenditure. The initial amount of funds on account under each head has been incorporated. Requirements at subhead level is provided in the form of a footnote to this speech. In gist, the proposed funds on account should be able to cope with around 2 months of the government's operational requirements. The aggregate amount of funds on account is 198,345,661,000 before the Appropriation Ordinance 2023 comes into operation. This represents around 31% of the total appropriation of 638,936,466,000 under the Appropriation Bill. For recurrent expenditure subheads, we in general seek 20% of their provisions as funds on account. For non-recurrent and capital expenditure subheads, due to the irregular and lumpy nature, 100% of their provisions as shown in the draft estimates is sought. The above aggregate amount of funds on account includes the commitment amount of $32.5 billion for the provision of a new round of consumption voucher scheme as announced in the 23-24 budget. As there is a need to implement the scheme as soon as possible, the government could start the work by using the amount of funds after the 1st of April if the motion is passed. Apart from the expenditure on this scheme, the government has to make payments for a large number of expenditure items every day. Taking this start of the 2023-24 financial year as an example, numerous major government expenditure items to be settled within a week's time include A. Subvention payments to around $7.4 billion to the Hospital Authority. B. Payments to the Comprehensive Social Security Assistance and Social Security Allowance totaling around $0.9 billion to about 70,000 families and 110 individuals. C. Grants of around $1.7 billion to UGC-funded universities. D. Subvention payments of around $750 million to the Vocational Training Council. E. Subsidies of around $645 million to about 760 kindergartens. And F. Pension gratuities of around $630 million to retired civil servants. There are also other expenses such as salaries of contract staff as well as accounts payable to suppliers. It takes at least 2 to 3 working days for government departments and banks to process a large number of payments made by auto pay. It also takes some days to complete the statutory procedures after passage of the vote on account resolution, including the gazettal process and procedures for issuance of the vote on account warrant, so that the government can make payments starting from the 1st of April as usual. In order to ensure that government has the necessary resources to continue those services provided to the public, I urge members to support the motion. In fact, failure to secure the passage of the vote on account resolution in a timely manner would pose a real and serious impact to the continued operation of the government, including the public sector, the services sector, the business sector, and ultimately the entire community, which counts on the services and funding support from the government. Subject to the above aggregate amount not being exceeded, the resolution enables the Financial Secretary to vary the funds on account in respect of any subhead. But these variations must not exceed the provision for that subhead in a 23-24 estimates of expenditure. To enhance transparency and in line with the established practice, we will report to the Finance Committee of this Council if the Financial Secretary has exercised this authority to meet necessary requirements. The vote on account will be subsumed under the Appropriation Ordinance 2023 upon its enactment and commencement. Madam Deputy, I beg to move. I now propose to question you that the motion moved by the Secretary be passed. Mr. Tony Tse.
Thank you, Madam Deputy. I speak in support of the Secretary for Financial Services and the Treasury, who has proposed under Section 7.1 of the Public Finance Ordinance, that is what we call the Vote on Account Ordinance or Resolution. Well, the government announced its budget and then it would be tabled before the Finance Committee for scrutiny, and as the Secretary has pointed out, well, because it takes time for the scrutiny to be completed, and therefore normally it would only be passed by late April or early May, and therefore before the 31st of March each year, that is before the close of the fiscal year, the government would come to this council for a vote on account, so that before the passage of the budget, the bureaus will continue to operate as usual in order to ensure that services and support for the community will not be affected by the scrutiny of this council on the budget. Well, we all take this as normal, and we have taken it for granted, and I would normally speak, and that's because I have to refute the specious arguments put forth by the mutual destruction camp. And during the past year, our election system has been perfected, and there are no longer times where the opposition camp would filibuster simply because they like to cause destruction to this council. And I still would like to speak in support of this because for public expenses, they are continuing to rise, and I'd like to express my concern. Well, this year, the vote on account has reduced by about $70 billion and is less than $200 billion. The main reason being that with the pandemic over, there is no further need for the government to use any anti-epidemic funds to fight the pandemic. Still is on the high side. If you look at the first budget after the reunification in 1998, we only need to spend about $222 billion when compared to what we have to pass today is about the same. And then for 2022 and 23, if you look at the estimates on government spending, it was a record high, well, over $896 billion. In other words, it's about 4 times that of 1998. So if you look at the cumulative inflation or GDP growth in the past 25 years, and also the taxpayers' income growth, well, the rate of increase is quite shocking. And it's something that both this council and members of the community should be concerned about. I've noticed that in this year's budget speech, the Financial Secretary spent some time on elaborating on Article 107 of the Basic Law, and he said that the very fundamental objective of the government's governance is to take care of the well-being of the community, and therefore, in looking at the government's financial position, we should not only be focusing on the short-term performance, we should also be looking at the overall economic cycles and also the circumstances that are happening and so on. I agree, because one of the main functions of the government's reserve is to cope with adversities and to provide support to the community and enterprises, and also to maintain stability in our community. And yet, what happens in the past is that for successive years, the government spending has been on the rise, and therefore, how the government is going to cope with that situation is something that we must not ignore. And therefore, I hope that the administration will monitor closely the growth rate of government spending so that our public finance and in terms of our reserve, we can ensure that it can remain stable. Thank you. Dr. Low Wai Kwok. Madam Deputy, I speak in support of the passage of the resolution under the Public Finance Ordinance. This is about the 2023-24 vote on account resolution. Indeed, there is a genuine need for us to pass that, and is also an urgent matter. In accordance with our arrangement, the 2023-24 estimates would only be resuming its second reading on the 26th of April, and we would only be able to have its third reading on the 3rd of May. And in order to ensure that between the 1st of April, that is the start of the financial year, to the 3rd of May, government services and functions will not be affected by the lack of funds. We will have to pass this resolution in order to ensure that sufficient funding will be given to the relevant authorities to continue with their operations, and also to ensure that they can complete all the legislative procedures before the passage of the budget. And therefore, this is a very urgent matter. This is a necessary procedure that has been in place for many years. But then there is something that we need to take note of. The Secretary for Financial Services and the Treasury just moved the passage of this resolution, and in his speech he said that the vote on account that are being applied for would amount to $198 billion, and that would cover the new round of consumption voucher scheme, and that would incur about $32.5 billion on a part of the government, and therefore the scrutiny today has already exceeded the norm, and there is an additional need for us to pass it today. And I've already submitted our 2023-24 financial proposal for 23-24, and there were 100 recommendations, including the consumption voucher scheme, because looking at our past experience, the consumption vouchers can ease the burden on the community, and that would also induce more spending, and that would also enable the various sectors to recover quickly. And the Financial Secretary has taken heed of our advice, and he has announced that once again we will be introducing the e-consumption voucher scheme today, so that for new arrivals as well as permanent residents of Hong Kong, they will still be able to get a total of $5,000 worth of consumption vouchers. And for those coming to Hong Kong and eligible students coming to study in Hong Kong, they would also be able to get half of that amount, that is $2,500 worth of consumption vouchers. And according to the announcement, about 6.4 million residents or eligible persons who have registered, they would also be able to get the first batch of the consumption vouchers. And then on the 15th of July, they are going to get the second batch of the consumption vouchers. After 3 years of the pandemic, many SMEs are still subject to a lot of pressure, even though we are now seeing a steady recovery in the economy. Still, we have to consolidate what we have achieved so far. With the passage of this today, we will be able to make use of funds in order to implement the consumption voucher scheme as soon as possible, and also with a series of events, including the Happy Hong Kong events and so on. Well, we will be able to continue to revive the economy and boost the recovery of our economy. With these remarks, I support this resolution under the PFO. Thank you. Mr. Stanley Ng. Madam Deputy, I speak in support of the proposed resolution under the Public Finance Ordinance. This is a vote on account resolution. Well, the FTU has proposed that in the new budget, we should have an electronic consumption voucher for people's livelihood. We believe that we should implement this as soon as possible. And this proposal should be better able to take care of people's daily spending, including rentals, utility charges. These are my remarks, and I'd like to render my support. Thank you.
Mr. Tommy Chang. Madam Deputy, we have been talking about the consumption voucher since many years ago. It's only 3 years ago that we once again raised the issue of consumption voucher, and we thank the Financial Secretary for accepting our proposal. And for this year's budget, we once again reiterated to the Financial Secretary that because of the huge deficits, we should really be careful in how the money is spent. However, we also explained that in retail, in food and catering, in many different sectors, even though we seem to have resumed to normal, we are still concerned that by June we would need another boost for our sector, and we are very thankful to see the consumption vouchers coming out again. The Financial Secretary has been a staunch support for us. I hope we'll be able to see the consumption vouchers come out as soon as possible.
Does any member wish to speak? If not, I call upon the Secretary for Financial Services and the Treasury to reply. Secretary, please. Thank you, Madam Deputy. I also thank members for their questions and their comments. I would like to thank members for their support as well. Just now, a member mentioned about demand and supply. Indeed, we've had the epidemic for 3 years. Everything has stabilized. We have sound finances. But over 2 years, we have spent a huge amount. We're faced with uncertainties in the external environment. We will continue to exercise vigorous physical discipline and spend within our means. We will carefully control our expenditure and explore new sources of income. We will consider the use of various financial tools, including issuing bonds to generate revenue to support various infrastructures and to support expenditure in the community. We will carefully control the growth of the establishment. In 2023-24, we will continue to stick to the zero increase in the civil service. Hong Kong is a fully external oriented economy. We are subject to volatilities of outside factors. So there will be impact as is inevitable. Well, for 23-24 and 24-25, the operation expenditure will run a deficit, but over the long term, we will have a surplus. Members have also spoken on consumption vouchers. The new round of consumption voucher scheme has drawn reference from past experience. We want to make use of it to invigorate our economy. In 2022, we have launched the consumption voucher scheme. It has been very effective. We want something similar. This is a one-off measure. This will not bring long-term burden to our finances. The Appropriation Bill 2023 is being scrutinized by the LegCo. Between the 11th and 14th, as well as the 17th of April, departments and policy bureaus will answer questions in the Special Finance Committee meeting. And in the second reading on the 26th and 27th of April of the Appropriation Bill, members can express their views. I ask members to support our resolution so that at the start of the financial year on the 1st of April 2023, till the time when the Appropriation Ordinance 23 comes into operation, we will have sufficient funding to pay. I now put the question to you that the motion moved by the Secretary be passed. Those in favor, please raise their hands. Those against, please raise their hands. I think the question is agreed by members, majority of members present. I declare the motion passed.
一項議案根據